sure that that recording is happening. Yes, it is. All right. All right. Well, good morning and welcome to Supporting Elementary Students with Research-Based Literacy Instruction. We are glad you have joined us on this beautiful Tuesday morning. Just so that you know who you're dealing with today, my name is Melissa Algrim. I am Director of Reading Sufficiency. I am joined today by my colleague, Deb Wade, who's the Director of Elementary ELA, and we are going to be walking you through this journey over the next hour and a half. We are also thrilled to have two of our colleagues that are helping us out, both today in our meeting and prior as we were gathering information. Jason Stevenson, who is our Director of Secondary ELA, is helping us with moderating and checking in the chat. And Lauren Jinks Jones, who is our Executive Director of Early Childhood, has helped us with a lot of the front material. Unfortunately, she had other obligations this morning and could not join us, but I know that she is with us definitely in spirit because we do work together tightly as a team.
All right, so the ways that we plan to interact today, and we know that technology is great until it isn't, but it's our hope. We're going to take advantage of the fact that we have these tools because we can't be together in person. So we are going to be using the chat box. Most of you are already doing your good mornings and where you're from, which is absolutely perfect. And we will be asking you to put some things in the chat throughout our session as well. We are going to use the poll feature on Zoom as well in just a moment. We're also going to use the Jamboard app and possibly even some time to just stop and jot. You're going to notice on some of the slides that we have some QR codes, and that's just for quick, easy access to some of our resources. But I want to remind everyone that we will be sharing everything in this presentation, the links, the resources, all of that at the end of our session. And so hopefully you've already had a chance to get onto the Mentimeter activity, and that is an additional way that we are hoping to engage with you today. So I mentioned the Zoom poll, and we are going to go ahead and do that as well. So let me see if I can launch that for you so that we can know who is here with us this morning. Y'all are doing great. We're to almost 60% of people voted. Oh, we're over it. Fantastic. We have good diversity today. Just a few more moments. Looks like we've kind of slowed down on our polling, and so I'm going to go ahead and share this out. Is everyone able to see that? Looks like we have almost everybody represented, so fantastic. Thank you all for doing that. So on the next slide, one of the things I mentioned is that we're going to be using something called Jamboard. And if you are not familiar with this, we will have links later on in our session that'll take you to an activity where basically this is just a way for us to virtually post notes on a community board. And I've put some boxes around the two areas that you're going to need to pay attention to. At the top, you'll see an orange box that says navigating the slides. Each group is going to have 4 different slides that they can toggle back and forth between, depending on if one slide gets filled up quickly, you can move to the next. And then the bottom left area where it says adding a note, that's right below the black circle with the white arrow in it. You're going to click on that to create that sticky note, that virtual note that you can type on. And we're going to do a 3-2-1 activity later on. And so we are going to ask that you color code things, which you'll be able to do when you click on that adding a note feature. And you can also size it depending on how big you want. I will ask in advance that you not make it full screen. We've actually had that happen in some other presentations. So we will be asking for a yellow note about 3 facts you learned, a blue with 2 questions you still have, and then a pink with an opinion that you have after the reading. So that's just a really quick overview of Jamboard, and we can go back over some things later on when we get to that point in the session.
All right, so today, as with all sessions, we want to know what are we going to be talking about. So we have 4 different learning goals that we really want to make sure that we are addressing throughout our hour and a half. First, we're going to discuss how the revised ELA standards support effective learning within the elementary literacy block. And then we're going to examine how those key learning elements and how they shift in the different elementary grades, because those shifts are extremely important for determining what needs to be the focus in each grade level. And then identifying how braiding, reading and writing skills together can help make instruction more efficient. And then finally, reflecting on special considerations to address unfinished learning, especially in these early grades. So when we first got started, we asked you to participate in a quick survey and I'm going to try to download these results and see if I can share those. What we were wanting to identify was the skills that help students become proficient readers and writers. And Deb, what I'm seeing on my screen is blank. So obviously we were having some issues with the with this Mentimeter.
I will see if I can get to that a little bit later on.
Absolutely. So, but in the meantime, we know that a lot of times when we're talking about proficient readers and writers, there's certain things that come to mind. So if you would just take a moment and would you just pop in the chat, what is a word or 2 that comes to mind when you think proficient readers and writers? What's something that that you might think about? So for example, we might have somebody that says fluency is something that comes up. We might have somebody else that thinks about reading every day is something that comes about. So, okay, so we've got that coming along. Thank you. And just looking at the chat and just doing a quick scan, I'm seeing things like comprehension, fluency, vocabulary, phonemic awareness, automaticity, being read to frequently. Love that one. Using prior knowledge, that has definitely been a big part of the conversation over the last year, especially. Alphabetic knowledge, repetition, persistence, and time. Nice. Being able to put it all together. Heather, you've really touched on a big part of what we have to address in reading and writing is that we don't just teach one skill. We teach a lot of skills that definitely have to come together. And that's really hard to do. Not only hard to do, but hard for us as teachers to plan for. I also see things like book availability, having students show what they know, getting ideas down on paper. Love that we're also addressing the output of that as well as the input. So, all right, thank you very much for those different choices. Sorry that the word cloud didn't work, but we're going to still attempt that a little bit later on. And we're going to, as with all things technology, as we've discovered over the last year, just keep trekking on.
Absolutely. So one of the things that Melissa mentioned when we were talking about our learning goals for the day was that we wanted to take a little bit of time to discuss how the 2021 ELA standards support effective learning in an elementary literacy block. And I just wanted to really quickly point out some of the major shifts that are more about the elementary grades maybe than some of the secondary. So in particular, we wanted to really quickly touch on the fact that Standard 2 Reading Foundations is now more closely aligned to the science of reading. And you'll see on your screen that it talks about objectives were added to fill gaps. What was happening is that there was a drop off from about second grade on. And our elementary teams were very intentional and deliberate in making sure that we filled those gaps, that we continued that learning progression for as long as we could. There's now skills in second, third, fourth, and fifth grade that were not there before. And we're really excited about how those more advanced skills really do continue that progression. Another thing that happened in Standard 2 Reading Foundations is that we have a brand new substrand. We have a spelling and encoding strand, and that was created specifically to make sure that the skills students learn in that phonics and word study strand are now able to be applied. And so we still have that input output that we feel so strongly about with reading and writing. We have that mirrored in the spelling and encoding strand, and I'm really excited about that being in our 2021 standards. Another shift for elementary is in reading and writing process. That's the second Standard 2, and it now has objectives that more fully support the writing process. There were some gaps here as well, and one of the things that the teams worked hard on is to make sure that publishing was included in all the grades and what that might look like in an early childhood classroom, an upper elementary classroom, middle school, and high school. So previously, some of the skills were the same pre-K through 12, and we know that that is not often the case where that applies. So we made sure that there were examples that were actually applicable to each grade band. Yesterday, Jason Stevenson, who's moderating the session for us today, he and I had the privilege of presenting about the standards and some of the things that I've just touched on, as well as several others. And so I've put some links here again. They will be available for you at the end of the session, but if you have not been able to access the new 2021 version of the standards, we have a link here for that. We also have some information about our session, and that's on this slide as well. So it will give you a little bit more information, a little bit more guidance on those 2021 ELA standards that we are so excited about.
All right, so if we're going to talk about elementary literacy, one of the important things, we spend a lot of time talking about elementary literacy as well as learning about it in our classrooms. And there's a specific reason for that. It's a really important skill, but why? So some of the things to keep in mind that according to research from the Annie E. Casey Foundation, the inability to read well by the end of third grade means a student is 4 times more likely to drop out of high school. That's a pretty significant correlation. Studies also show that 74% of third graders who read poorly still struggle in 9th grade. And third grade reading scores can really predict a student's likelihood to graduate high school. So when we have that emphasis on early reading, it's one of those that if we don't have it down, there really is a time where we really have to have this down so that students have that shot of being successful. Otherwise, they have an extremely difficult road in front of them. Not that they can't do it, but it is much, much harder than it definitely needs to be. Also, the inability to read has some long-lasting financial impacts. So students who need intervention, such as additional assistance by teachers with special training and curriculum, are twice as expensive to educate. So most school districts spend between $1,800 to $3,400 educating per child per year on students who need remediation. So that takes a lot of funding that could be spent in a lot of other ways if we are having to go back and remediate. So it's really important when we say we want to get our core instruction down right and get the best that we can there. That's one of the reasons why is we need to make sure that we're using those funds in the best way possible too. Every student who leaves school without graduating costs society about $260,000 in lost earnings, taxes, and productivity. So we have in the elementary grades a pretty big load on our shoulders of making sure that those students who are able to read by third grade because of that correlation for being able to graduate on time as well. According to the World Literacy Foundation report from 2012, poor educational outcomes are linked to other negative consequences such as poverty, unemployment, illness, and crime. So the National Adult Literacy Survey reports that 70% of all incarcerated adults cannot read at a fourth grade level. Recently, they have been doing more studies with incarcerated adults and their relationship to dyslexia, and finding that that is a prevalent issue. So there's, again, a direct, not saying that a student's inability to read is going to make them a criminal, obviously, but it does definitely reduce some of their opportunities. And we need to make sure that they have the best opportunities that they can. Okay. So the Children's Reading Foundation states that children who are not reading on grade level by the end of third grade struggle in every class year after year because over 85% of the curriculum is taught by reading. Reading is the skill by which students get information from books, computers, worksheets, and boards to learn math, science, literature, social studies, and much more. This is not meant to imply that other content areas only learn by reading a textbook. Best practice tells us otherwise. But consider that reading skills involve the ability to discuss, research, convey results, create an oral or written summary of what has been learned, and many other things that involve language. It's also important to note that we cannot discuss reading without also discussing writing. Writing directly benefits students' reading skills and vice versa. Both reading and writing begin with oral language, and oral language is a skill that we tend to learn naturally. Reading and writing, however, are relatively new skills in human history, and our brains are not wired to do this naturally. So we must be explicitly taught these skills. Due to its importance, literacy, especially early literacy, has been the subject of thousands of research studies over the last few decades. One of the most well-known reports, the National Reading Panel, was commissioned by the US Congress in 1997, published in 2000. And this report took into account the work done by the National Research Council in 1998 when they published Preventing Reading Difficulties in Young Children. The National Research Council identified and summarized research literature relevant to the critical skills, environments, and early developmental interactions that are instrumental in the acquisition of beginning reading skills. So based on the findings of that original report, the National Reading Panel identified key topics essential to early reading. In each of these topics, the panel conducted literature reviews and received oral and written testimony to answer key research questions. The primary purpose of the National Early Literacy Panel was to synthesize research to contribute to decisions in educational policy and practice that affect early literacy development, and to determine how teachers and families could support young children's language and literacy development, particularly for ages birth through 5 years, because we know that language starts very early. What Works Clearinghouse, as part of the Institute of Education Sciences, has created multiple practice guides over a variety of topics as recommendations for educators to address challenges in their classrooms and schools. And these practice guides are based on reviews of research, the experiences of practitioners, and the expert opinions of a panel of nationally recognized experts. In addition, there's many studies that are released each year in a variety of peer-reviewed journals for reading, psychology, and other related education sciences. So when you hear the phrase science of reading, we're talking about all of these studies working together to help inform our instruction. So we've put the links to these major works that are available. Then we will have these available to you also at the end of our session, just for a little nighttime reading. These are not light reads, obviously. They are large meta-analysis studies, but they have a lot of really helpful information if we're trying to figure out, should we do this or that in our classroom? Because those studies do exist to help inform what we should be doing. So we mentioned earlier, somebody had mentioned when we were doing our quick scan in our chat about the different skills that have to be woven together when we are teaching students how to read or write. And so let's talk for just a moment about the different skills that are involved in reading. It's important to recognize that those skills, that there's a lot of those skills they have to master and weave together to become proficient readers. So one way to look at reading skills is to divide them into two large buckets called word recognition skills and language comprehension skills. And within each of those buckets, there's a lot of other skills to consider. Now, many of you that have listened to us over the last year recognize these two buckets as a model of what we call the simple view of reading with Goff and Tumner. It's a model that's been around since 1986, but it's not so simple. It's just a simplified way of talking about reading skills. So under word recognition, students must master things like phonemic awareness or working with individual sounds within a word. They must then be able to connect those sounds to graphemes, letters or letter combinations that represent those sounds. Students must make this connection for both decoding, what we usually call phonics, as well as encoding or spelling. As students become more proficient with those skills, they build a bank of words that they can recognize by sight. All of these skills are considered automatic, or skills that are eventually learned so well that they can be done without conscious thought. They don't take up working memory when students are reading. As proficient readers, when we read, we don't focus on these skills because they are automatic for us. Language comprehension skills also include quite a few things within that bucket, as well as such as background knowledge, vocabulary, and language structures such as grammar and text structure. Other skills in this bucket also include verbal reasoning or understanding inferences or figurative language, as well as literacy knowledge. These are skills that are considered strategic, which means that even as proficient readers, we must consider which skills should be used at which time. They generally require some conscious thought or some working memory as we're building an understanding of what we are reading. As the skills in both of these buckets become established, students develop fluency with their reading. So it's important to note that these skills are not developed separately. They depend upon one another, and students cannot become proficient readers unless they master skills in both areas. There's also been an ample amount of research that shows students will learn these skills most effectively with explicit instruction. Word recognition skills must also be sequential and cumulative. So for those of you, again, that have become a little more familiar, you'll notice that a lot of these skills we've just talked about are also included in a model called Scarborough's Reading Rope. We've just given it to you in a little bit different format to try. We didn't want to spend a lot of time on those research models today. We have other opportunities to discuss those, but understanding that we can take this down and talk about those word recognition skills, the things that we have to do in those early grades to lift the code off the page, and then the language comprehension skills, which can be done at first orally and then moving to print, that really require us to continuously think about that so that we can build meaning.
So when Melissa and I were discussing how to develop this session, one of the things that we were excited to realize is that there's also a similar kind of bucket system that works for writing. And it's just kind of a universal truth, unfortunately, that teachers in elementary school, a lot of them just aren't sure what writing instruction should include. And so we found this and thought that it just does a beautiful job of showing the same kind of bucket system. But then in just a moment, we're going to go into detail about how these two areas are interconnected and how they go hand in hand. So the first thing that we have with our writing skills is transcription. I hope.
There we go.
Okay. And then following that is writing. Underneath that are some skills: spelling, handwriting, keyboarding. Again, we're going to go into those in a little more detail in a moment. We also have writing craft. That involves word choice, literary devices, and awareness of audience. After that, we have text structure. That goes into organization, linking and transition words, what kind of mode are we writing in, structure paragraphs. We also have syntax, grammar, punctuation, sentence elaboration. In the new standards, Standard 5 has had a beautiful makeover, and syntax just is featured even more than it was before. And then finally, critical thinking. And we have the writing process, which has also been revised and, in my opinion, improved in the 2021 standards, as well as just developing those ideas and organizing the information.
So often we find that there's both reading and writing skills that are required. And there's a few skills in both areas that allow learners to lift the words off the page when reading and put the words on the page when writing. These are skills, again, that we mentioned have to be automatic so that they don't require working memory. That working memory is a huge part of our discussion. We want kids to discover and learn, but we want them to really put their brain power on the things that are worthy of their brain power. If they're having to still discover how to write a specific letter, which is something that should be automatic, that's not something we want to grapple with. We want them to grapple with why an author might use different literary devices in their writing to make it more enhanced. So again, trying to get that focus there. I need to mute real quick. There we go. So just as developing automaticity and fluency with decoding skills enables students to focus on making meaning while reading, the sooner students become automatic and fluent with spelling and handwriting, as well as keyboarding, the sooner they will be able to focus their attention on the other strands of the writing rope. So during the primary grade, students benefit from that explicit instruction in spelling, as well as handwriting or keyboarding. And I noticed that yesterday in Deb and Jason's session, one of the comments when looking at the standards was a lot of people realized that cursive was there. Actually, cursive was there all along. It's something that we have not focused on as well as just learning how to form letters in print. So making sure that we are explicitly teaching that again early so that students are not having to spend their working memory on how to form the letters and can work on the meaning behind those words that they're writing down. When we move to those more strategic skills, we continue to see the connections between reading and writing. So proficient readers use background knowledge to go beyond a literal understanding of what the text says in order to get to what the author is actually trying to convey. So this requires the reader to make inferences and to understand that figurative language. Writers use the same skills when developing critical thinking in writing. So in this writing skill, learners focus on the process of writing while developing ideas or gathering information from written and multimedia sources. Critical thinking also addresses developing an awareness of the writing process so the writer's thoughts can be effectively communicated. And this particular skill is now fully incorporated into those revised ELA standards. So when we're thinking about writing process and gathering information and forming ideas, we're looking at both parts of Standard 2 as well as Standard 3, which is critical reading and writing, Standard 4, vocabulary, Standard 7 for multimodal literacies, as well as thinking about gathering that information under Standard 6 in research. And Connie, I so appreciate your voice in looking at our library media specialists, because this is a great way to partner with our library media specialists of developing those reading skills for research as well as those writing skills for conveying what we're learning. Background knowledge as well also is tightly woven with vocabulary, and they often are developed together. When we learn about new things, we learn new words that describe those new things. So those skills often align with writing craft, in which a learner is often developing word choice and effectively using literary devices and elements such as plot, setting, narrative, characters, themes, and different literary techniques such as figurative language, as well as the appropriate tone and vocabulary to address an audience. And children learn this at a very young age, even when addressing others orally. And remember that we start writing in an oral fashion. The more we speak, the more we're able to start transferring those thoughts to paper. Again, all over our standards, particularly in standards 3, 4, and 6, when we're talking about those critical reading and writing skills, vocabulary, and research.
All right. So with language structures and syntax working together, it makes perfect sense. With syntax being the study and understanding of grammar, how words are arranged, how phrases and clauses make up a sentence, all of that comes into play in syntax. And that's why it connects so well with our language structures. So that explicit instruction that Melissa referenced earlier, that plays out here when students are very explicitly focused on building sentence skills and activities where they're elaborating with their words and combining sentences. And all of those are skills that progress through standard 5 language in our revised standards. And so it's really a lovely relationship here with that interconnectivity where we show that these structures really do go right into the syntax portion of the writing rote. And then the last one we have is text structure, and that connects with literacy knowledge. And what we have here is basically just kind of the culmination where we have all of these other things. How do we organize it? How do we make sure that our words convey the meaning that we want them to? So this goes all the way back to standard 2 reading and writing foundations with print concepts. We have to make sure that they understand how words are on a page that we read left to right, top to bottom in a book. And so just something as simple as that. And then we move from there to the reading and writing process, standard 2, how are paragraphs structured? How do we use transition words? What genres are being incorporated in our writing? Moving to standard 3, our critical reading and writing. Do we understand what mode needs to be used for this particular writing task? Are we writing a narrative or informative? Are we writing an opinion about something? And then also those patterns of organization that go into text structure, cause and effect, problem and solution, comparison and contrast, all of that works here with a knowledge of how words are used on a page. They then become the authors who use those same words in that same way. And of course, we've been kind of talking about how other standards are interconnected as well. And standard 4 vocabulary, when we're talking about the word choice again, and of course, standard 6 research comes into play. If we're writing something informative, research could be coming in as well. So we just wanted to take a moment here and just really emphasize that there is and should be always a connection between reading and writing instruction. There's cases where there's a separation of those sometimes, where possibly even 2 different teachers are instructing students in these skills. And even with that, what we hope we've shown is that if you're one teacher teaching this, how they connect. If it happens to be 2 different teachers working together, again, how you can be doing 2 parts, 2 sides of the same coin throughout this whole process.
Okay, so we're going to shift our focus for a moment. Deb and I have done a lot of talking, so now it's your turn to play. So we're going to look at how those reading and writing skills truly do work together and look at some of the resources that have been developed to show effective practices for addressing those skills. So to date, there are 26 practice guides published covering a variety of topics. 3 of the practice guides are especially relevant for elementary literacy. There are 2 that are dealing directly with reading instruction and 1 that is addressing writing. We're going to spend a few minutes of our time today exploring one of these practice guides as we discuss some important considerations for elementary reading instruction. All of the practice guides are set up in a very similar format. So as we participate in this activity, we're hoping to achieve 2 things. One is we want to give you some time to engage with the material and either learn new information or maybe affirm what you already know if you have been already doing quite a bit of studying. And then second, we want to provide an opportunity for you to see that format of the practice guides and the information they have to offer, since there's no reason to reinvent the wheel. When there's already some good materials out there, sometimes we just have to have some time to intentionally dig in and see what's there. So the practice guide that we're going to explore today offers 4 recommendations for instruction. In just a moment, we're going to divide you into some groups, and each group is going to examine one of those recommendations. To make it easier, we've created just a brief document with a portion of each recommendation for you to review rather than trying to navigate a larger document. After taking a couple of minutes to read the material, we want you to go to the corresponding link for Jamboard, which we talked about when we got started of how to use, and respond to what you've read. So we're going to use a 3-2-1 response strategy, just to remind you what Deb talked to us about at the beginning. On your slide, you're going to post 3 facts that you learn on a yellow Post-it note. We'll have 2 questions that you might still have about what you've read, because obviously you're only reading a very small portion of a larger document. So you probably will still have questions, and an opinion that you have based on that material there in pink. So out of this practice guide, which is addressing foundational skills to support reading for understanding in kindergarten through 3rd grade. By the way, 4th and 5th grade teachers, we are not leaving you out. Recognize that with a pandemic year that we've had, you are going to have students that are still addressing skills that are normally addressed in K through 3. And the more that we have this understanding, and there's also some of these skills that can easily be brought up to 4th and 5th grade as well. So just kind of keep that in mind as we're moving forward, and what might need to be, how things can be relevant for you. When we're talking about this particular practice guide, I mentioned that there's 4 recommendations from the research for effective instruction for reading in K through 3. One is to teach students academic language skills, including the use of inferential and narrative language and vocabulary knowledge. Second is to develop an awareness of the segments of sounds in speech and how they link to letters. So if you'll recall, the segments of sounds in speech, that's that phonemic awareness. Linking it is moving into that alphabetic knowledge and phonics. Teaching students to decode words, analyze word parts, and write and recognize words. Boy, that's dealing with, again, our decoding as well as some vocabulary when we're addressing word parts, and then encoding and simple writing. And then finally, ensuring that each student reads connected text every day to support that reading accuracy, fluency, and comprehension. Because whenever we learn a skill, we want to always apply that to text that connects to those skills that we just did. Okay, so we want you to thinking about, when were you born? So if you were born in January, February, or March, we're going to ask you to take a deeper dive into recommendation 1. You're going to go to that Google link that Jason's going to be dropping into the chat here in just a moment. Take a couple of minutes, read over that document, just that first part. It's usually about just the first page that we're asking you to look over, and then start responding on the Jamboard. Now you'll notice that there's some additional pages after that first initial part that we want you to respond to. And that is just to give you a taste of some of the information and recommendations that are involved in these. Finally, we have recommendation 2. If you were in April, May, or June, you just recently had that birthday, we want you to take that deeper dive in recommendation 2 of dealing with speech sounds. Recommendation 3, if you were in July, August, or September, you're going to take that deeper dive into that decoding and encoding recommendation for 3. And recommendation 4 of October and November, December, you're going to be looking closely at that use of connected text and how important that is. So we are going to stop talking and we're going to set our timer for, what do we say, Deb, about 10 minutes. So about 10 minutes, we're going to give you time to read that. We're going to be looking at those Jamboards and we will summarize kind of what we're seeing on those Jamboards in just a moment. Jamboard 4 is okay. We will get that fixed in a moment. All right.
Okay. Thank you, Jason.
Okay, Jamboard 4 should be updated now. If you are not in a position where you can respond on the Jamboard, we invite you to, if you are able to respond on chat, that's wonderful. We would welcome that response. If you are not in a position where you can respond at all, if you are listening on your phone because you are trying to get to other appointments, perfectly understand that. We would strongly encourage you to explore these links when you have that moment, because there's a lot of really good information here, which I hope you'll hear in just a moment.
Jason linked the recommendations above each group's Jamboard. So it should say recommendation 1 and then a link, and then Jamboard for group 1 following that, and then the same for groups 2, 3, and 4. And if you do share in the chat, if you could please just put what recommendation you were reading so that we can get a better idea of where your ideas are coming from.
Allison, that was my bad. I shared the wrong link in my rush. So the group 4 link, I just put in the chat again for you, okay? I'll just reshare everything, the recommendations and the Jamboard groups.
Okay, we've got about a minute and a half left on our time. I'm seeing a lot of things being posted on the different Jamboards, so it looks like we're still very busy working.
I'm glad you told me how much time we have left because I was thoroughly engrossed in just reading them.
I know. Okay, take just a few minutes or a few seconds and kind of wrap up the thought that you're currently working on. I have a feeling we could probably spend a significant amount of time on this and still not get to all of it.
Someone asked if other groups would get to see all of the Jamboards, and we will be sharing a landing page at the end of the session where you will be able to go to those different Jamboards and see what other people posted. Yes.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's see, just to make this a little bit easier. Deb, are you seeing the Jamboard for recommendation 1 on your screen right now?
I sure am.
All righty, you want to sum up what you've noticed?
I saw several notes as far as things that people learned about the importance of academic language and using that in the classroom and modeling that. Teachers should first model how to carry out guiding students to answer questions in complete sentences. Just giving them, again, that repetition in what language sounds like and what a complete sentence sounds like. And that segues beautifully into that writing, again, like we talked about. Engaging students in conversation, my goodness, that's a fabulous thing to talk about as well. Asking students questions before, during, and after a read aloud. I love that. I think that's a great thing. Some questions that people still had, seeing more examples of dialogue, some high impact strategies to teach academic vocabulary and context. Are there some statements that could specifically tie to EL students? Are there ways, let's see what else. How much time should be dedicated to writing? Hold that thought. We're going to get to that in a little bit. And then some opinions. It's applicable across all content areas. I definitely saw several people talking about that. Read alouds are so valuable. It's important for students to read every day. I saw something that someone had put about making sure that, here we go. In my opinion, as a middle level science teacher, I feel like it's so important to continue to remember the importance of building these skills in all classrooms, but especially ELA history and science. That cross-content area work is incredibly important. So I thought that was a good note to have there.
All right. Well, let's put up, this is from recommendation 2, which was looking at the phonemic awareness or the sound of different words and then starting to connect those to letters. And so we had a lot of facts that people had learned about the ability to break those sounds and how important that is. I love that 2 people noted, quoted out of this, that the ability to isolate sounds and then link those sounds to letters help students read about 70% of regular monosyllabic words. It is amazing how regular our language really is once we do learn how those sounds work together and connect. There was a little bit of some facts as well as some questions about the difference between the phonemic awareness part and then naming letters. There's research that supports both. So we really have to have students be able to work with those sounds and hear those sounds. Naming letters is also important. As a matter of fact, there's an extremely high predictability between the ability to name letters by the end of kindergarten and the ability to read proficiently by the end of 3rd grade. So they do connect. Now, that's not saying that if a student's unable to name letters, that's going to inhibit their ability. It's a correlation because of the things, the automaticity that they're seeing building in the brain there. So we have to be able to do both. Somebody commented that they think that we really overlook the importance of phonemic awareness and the link it has to being a successful reader. And you are absolutely correct. That has been happening in the past. And that's one of the things that research has really come out of, saying how important it is in order to be able to work with that phonemic awareness. And for students that are dealing with dyslexia, a lot of times that is an area where they are truly seeing some gaps and struggling. And that is one of the reasons for some of the revisions that were made in the ELA standards in those foundational skills that Deb discussed earlier. Talking about how that ability to decode, to hear those sounds, really does help. One question that I did want to address is wondering if nonsense words are helpful for this. So remember that nonsense words are a good assessment tool, but we don't necessarily want to use those for just teaching kids, because we do want to read for meaning. What nonsense words do is allow us to see, is that student really applying decoding skills to unfamiliar words? And so to remove the possibility that that word might be a sight word for that student, because sight words are just those words that that student can automatically recall, then those nonsense words are used for assessment purposes, to understand, are they applying those decoding rules that we've been teaching them? So are nonsense words helpful for this? Probably more in recommendation 3, when we're talking about decoding as a way of assessing, is our instruction having an effect or not, or do we need to go back and clean some things up? But for recommendation 2, we're really emphasizing the sounds. And I know several people talked about sound boxes or Elkonin boxes, which is sometimes what they're called. We also can call that phoneme grapheme mapping, where we're mapping the sounds to each letter and we're starting to make those connections. Okay. All right, so recommendation 3, let me put that Jamboard up where we can share it. There we go. And so Deb, you're muted for right now for some reason.
Yeah, I figured that out, and it has to happen at least once a meeting, doesn't it?
Of course, of course.
Okay, so for recommendation 3, some things that jumped out at me as far as facts that were learned. Spelling matters, short and sweet. Instructing students in common sound spelling patterns, regularly scheduled spelling tests. Have students check their own work by reviewing whether or not the word they created by blending was an actual real word or not. More reading equals more learned spelling patterns. I think having students read text daily, even without constructive feedback, helps with reading accuracy. Somebody said, just kind of a feedback, the article was great. We do dictation and spelling mastery almost every day. It really helps improve student reading ability and spelling comprehension, and it helps develop their writing skills. So it all works together, exactly. Questions. How can I incorporate these suggestions in upper elementary? I think, Melissa, you could probably speak to that better than I, but I think that particularly with the spelling, the morphology, those are things that there are resources out there that are actually more geared for upper elementary. And then what are some examples of non-decodable words? Always the pertinent, will there be any more professional development in the science of reading? Stay tuned for that as well. What is the difference between chunking and phonics? Seems like that's a Melissa question as well.
So chunking would be once students are learning how the individual sounds work together and they start going to those larger multisyllabic words. So 4th and 5th grade teachers, listen up, because you deal with a lot of really big words. So those skills that we learn in the early grades in 1st and 2nd grade, when we are decoding a word like cat, which is a single syllable and that has each letter has its own sound. Then I might move to catastrophic in 4th or 5th grade and taking and chunking those things, those syllables together and being able to decode each syllable and how does that work? Because there's specific rules for syllabication that help with our pronunciation and spelling as well. So making sure that we have had a chance to learn those 6 syllable types and then how those 6 syllable types help us with understanding the spelling and the decoding of that. And Deb, I really wanted to address the question about examples of non-decodable words, what we sometimes call those irregularly spelled words. Most of the time, those words are, there's regular spelling for all but maybe one phoneme. And so sometimes we use a method called heart words for that. And so for example, if I am a 1st grade student and I have not yet learned that IGH can make the long I sound, then night is going to be a hard word for me to understand. So by the time I'm older, then I know that pattern, so it's not a big deal. But for me, as a 1st grader, the N for night is regular and predictable. The T at the end is regular and predictable. It's that I sound, I'm going to want to spell it N-I-T. And so the part that I have to memorize is that IGH. And so that becomes that heart word part. And it's relative to development for that student based on what they've learned, because it's something I have to memorize as a 1st grader, but later on, when I'm spelling the word night, it becomes a sight word for me later on as an older student, because I've already developed that understanding of IGH makes that long I sound. And that's an area of decodable sight word, high frequency word. I mean, that's a whole big discussion. I think we could probably spend a good 2 hours on. We're not today, but I do know that as we talk a little bit later, we're going to talk about some opportunities for this upcoming year for additional learning. Okay, so finally, let's move to the last recommendation, recommendation 4, which was dealing with connected text. And I love the opinion that somebody wrote down that reading connected text is a great way to help students buy into reading, not just be bored with those isolated words. Those isolated words do serve a purpose, and we tend to get bored as proficient readers more quickly than our students do, especially our struggling readers. But for them to see, hey, all these skills that I'm learning in isolation, now this is how this helps me be a reader, gives them that sense of purpose. And it is incredibly important for them to be able to have that opportunity. Having the ability to read all different types of text. And I know there's a lot of discussions I've been monitoring on social media about when do we use decodable text? When do we use leveled readers? When do we use rich, authentic text with rich language? And there is a purpose and a use for all of those, and knowing when to use them according to our learning goals and purposes is a really important thing. So when I have a student that's just learning how to decode something and they're learning specific phonics skills, I want to give them something that's very controlled for those skills that they're trying to learn. But when I'm reading aloud to them, or they're older and they have good decoding ability, I want that rich language. We want to build those that background knowledge and that vocabulary that they get through those very rich, authentic texts, because it also models that writing. Predictable texts. Tim Shanahan just came out with a blog yesterday about 10 ways to, oh, I'm sorry, it was a Right to Read project, Margaret Goldberg out of California, came up with 10 ways of using predictable text to help with writing lessons, and having that be a good model for students to be able to, that are just getting that skill down, to be able to explore these skills that they're learning. So understanding that when we learn a skill, we definitely want to make it go all the way through to connecting that to text that's relevant, and understanding the different types of texts out there and when and why I might use those different types of texts. All right. Hopefully you have had an opportunity to see how these practice guides can be helpful for you. These would be great tools to use like in a PLC, or if you decided you wanted to take a little bit deeper dive into something to just go through. If you'll notice after each of those practice guides on the document that we gave you, and I'm just going to throw one up here so just to model for you, on recommendation 4, we just gave you a very beginning introductory. And then the group that authored this gave several sub recommendations. So there were 3 or 4 suggestions for how to enact that recommendation, this one on connected text. We gave you just the first one, just to kind of get a taste of here's some things that they have. And these are very practical application activities for the most part that say, here's what this can look like for less advanced readers, for more advanced readers. Here's some prompting, different things like that, that can be very helpful as you're trying to decide how can I take the tools that and resources I already have without having to go buy a new curriculum and apply these types of things to what I have, because it's not always about buying a new curriculum. Sometimes it's about being a better consumer of the curriculum resources that we currently have. Okay. All right. So as we move forward, we want to make sure that we are also addressing all of our literacy skills. So we have spent a lot of time talking about all of the different skills with both reading and writing. How do we get all of these in and still at the elementary level have time to teach math and science and social studies, because those are also critical for our students, not only just in those content areas, but knowledge in those content areas help our students become better readers and writers because it builds their background knowledge and vocabulary as well. So that is also having a reciprocal effect. So with all of those skills, there's really not a black and white answer for how do we get this in. There is not a prescriptive schedule we can give you. I'm sorry, that is the bad news. We can't just say, if you will just teach this for 7 minutes every day, everything will be golden, because that has, that's going to change according to the needs of the students in your classroom, the developmental level of the students in your classroom, and even from grade to grade and even time of the year within a grade. But there are a lot of things that we do need to consider when planning for student learning. So for example, one of the things we consider are grade level objectives, utilizing our standards as a tool, not as something to hold us back or to inhibit our teaching style, but to say these are the tools that are going to help us get our students all on the same page and to help us communicate with one another. How much time each skill needs for an effective lesson also is important. So if I am doing a phonics lesson, and let's say I'm doing a program that is highly effective and it says to do this, I need 30 minutes each day, there's no way to whittle that down to 15 minutes a day. You have to follow what that says. And we'll talk in just a moment about the proportion of time that you might need to consider at different grade levels. How often a skill should be addressed. There are some skills that we really do need that daily practice, even if it's just for 10 minutes every day to get that regular practice. And there are some things that we do that we might only need to hit once or twice a week, or maybe we do a short unit for a couple of weeks and we don't readdress it until maybe another 2 or 3 weeks later, because we can take some time to go in and out of those types of lessons. So identifying what needs that daily frequent practice, that weekly frequent practice, or just those toe dips very regularly throughout maybe a unit. Also deciding, would this skill be best taught in a whole group situation or a small group situation, because there's benefits and there's drawbacks to both. When I am trying to make sure that everybody in my group knows something, I'm going to say the same thing to everyone. That's best done in a whole group situation rather than trying to say it multiple times, because the drawback with small groups is I am teaching these 5 kids sitting in front of me, but the other 20 in my classroom are working on their own and they are not receiving that instruction. So I want to be very careful about when I decide I'm using small group instruction. Is it something that requires that extreme differentiation that I cannot do in a whole group because my other students are not getting the benefit of instruction during that time? And the younger we are, or the more that that student is struggling, the more that's a deficit for them. Okay. More importantly, also considering which skills can be effectively braided together for instruction, as well as how reading and writing skills can be taught and practiced in the context of other subject area learning can really help us use our time most effectively.
So the previous slide that Melissa was just sharing with all the question marks to me is a really appropriate visual. We have those concerns, we have those questions. What if we don't have enough time? Or what if we don't have enough time to teach writing specifically? Or even, how do we even know where to begin? And so that's why we wanted to take just a little bit of time, do something to show some proportions of time like Melissa talked about, and hopefully in a quick, fun way to get an idea of that. But what's important to remember is that literacy instruction is not one size fits all. What works in a kindergarten classroom is not going to work the same in a 5th grade classroom. We all know that, but it's still important to say it out loud. Those essential parts of literacy instruction, phonological awareness, word recognition, vocabulary, comprehension, writing, and fluency, they play bigger roles at different times. And so we're going to do a quick quiz with you to see if you can figure out what grade is being represented in a chart. All right, so all 3 of these, you're going to use your chat, and all you're going to do is put K, 2, or 5, one of those 3 answers. So is this example that's on the screen in a kindergarten classroom, a 2nd grade classroom, or a 5th grade classroom? So put K, 2, or 5. And I'm not going to tell you the answer yet. So we're going to have to just wait until the end. I have a feeling I'm dealing with a group of ringers, honestly. So we'll see.
So Deb, just so you know, the majority, it looks like, are saying 2. There are several, however, that are saying 5 and several saying K. So.
Okay, very good. All right, so let's look at the next one. Don't pick the same one. So if you picked 2nd grade on the first one, this time it's kindergarten or 5th grade. So here we have another chart. We have word recognition skills, fluency, comprehension, and vocabulary, and writing. Is this kindergarten, 2nd, or 5th?
Again, it seems like we have an overwhelming amount on 5. We have,
see that.
However, multiple for 2nd grade. I have not seen any for kinder yet.
Okay. So then finally, on our 3rd chart, whichever one you haven't chosen yet, that should be your answer this time. Looks a little bit different.
And this we're seeing several K. I've seen a few 2. I've seen a couple of 5.
Okay. So I will say that the first chart was grade 2. The second one was grade 5, and the third one was kindergarten. But here they are side by side in the order in which the grades would occur naturally. And so I just want to show 3 major areas in particular. So word recognition is represented with a WR, and you can see that that's more of a focus in the lower grades. Particularly in kindergarten, we had that extra component of phonological awareness, and that actually gets incorporated into that word recognition time. And so there's almost half of the time for kindergarten is taken up with word recognition and phonological awareness. Grades 2 and up don't have that separate instructional time devoted to phonological awareness. And so you see that there's a shift happening where there's more of an emphasis on language comprehension And you see that especially in that 5th grade chart. It looks very similar in 2nd grade, but 3rd grade and up, there's going to be more of a shift into language comprehension as well as writing. So that single W on all 3 charts, you can see that it's the smallest in kindergarten, a little bit larger in grade 2, and then even larger still in 5th grade. So that question that we had on the Jamboard about how much time should we devote to writing, you can see that that's a pretty large portion of our instructional time with literacy.
And I think, Deb, remember, our whole theme throughout this presentation too has been that writing is not separate from reading. Now, we're also not saying that writing is always a reading response activity. There's multiple types of writing as well that need to be engaged. But we don't want to teach our students that we read over here in the morning and then much later on we'll come over here and do writing and it's totally separate, because we should be learning these skills and then applying them. So thinking about it as an input output anytime we're planning those lessons.
Great point.
Okay, so let's talk about some priority learning. There's a lot of conversations that are going around priority standards as a way of consolidating curriculum. And I'll be honest, that term makes us cringe just a little bit. Teachers prioritize learning for students every day. We know we've done it in the classroom. We're all experienced teachers. This can be very effective. We are looking at our long list and we say, you know what, this is something I really need to get to today, or I really need to make sure my students have this mastered before we move on, or I can keep on going and practice this other thing over here. Priority learning does not mean teaching only specific standards. A lot of times that gets interpreted, just teach what's on the test. We are not advocating that at all. K2, you don't even have a test that you're dealing with. Then you have a lot of priority learning, however, that takes place in those grades. We don't want to ignore any of our standards. We get a very unbalanced curriculum in that way. However, so all of our standards have to be taught, but there are some that teachers have to ensure that students are able to do to mastery or to receive intervention services over those skills until they are mastered. We don't intervene on every single reading skill or writing skill that we have. But if a student is struggling with some of them, we do know that it is worth pulling that student out of other things to ensure that they can master this shorter list of things that they really are not going to be successful moving on until they get to that. Student Achievement Partners is a think tank organization that has put out a lot of different great information, and this is priority instructional content for English language arts. This is a paper that they have out, and that QR code will take you to that. Now, understand that this is also working with Achieve the Course, so they're talking probably more about Common Core with this particular paper, but thinking about using this as a model of some of those ideas, because reading is reading. I don't care what you call your standards. You still have to be able to identify the names of letters. You still have to be able to understand the 6 syllable types. So some of those types of things that they address, be thinking about what is it that I really need to make sure that I have. And there's some guiding questions when trying to decide how important is this. And again, all of our standards have to be taught and addressed. They all work together to form that whole understanding that we want our students to have. But when we're looking at individual objectives, does that objective last beyond this grade level? So for example, I'm going to use decoding as an example. If I have an inability to decode 1 syllable words, simple CVC short vowel words, is that going to affect my learning beyond 1st grade when I'm normally going to learn that skill? I think we can all 100% say, yes, that is going to be a problem if I'm in 5th grade and I still cannot decode simple 1 syllable CVC words. Does that have an application to other content areas? If I go to science or social studies in 1st grade and I cannot decode those simple words, am I going to struggle with the what's being presented to me? Probably so in that case. And is this a prerequisite for future learning? If I don't have that CVC words down, I'm going to struggle with long vowels. I'm going to struggle with multisyllabic words. So yes, that has an absolute prerequisite for that future learning. So those are the things that I would need to stop and make sure that that student has mastered, and make that, excuse me, a huge priority. So as we move into our getting back with our students this fall, whether you were virtual or whether you were in person, it might have been you were in person the entire time, but the student that you're working with had to be quarantined and missed quite a bit of school, or has moved from another school. So they may have had some gaps there. So be thinking about what is it that we really need to ensure that those kiddos have before we move forward. Also keep in mind that braided learning. There's that connection of skills within reading and writing. So for example, I gave you the example of CVC words. There's also that connection of applying that to syllables or hearing sounds in words and understanding beginning sound, middle sound, end sound. So within the reading strand, I can braid some of those skills together. I can braid skills between reading and writing. If I'm learning on reading about character development and how an author develops a character, I can also turn around and apply that in my writing as I'm writing my own narrative and developing a character and using the models that I'm seeing in my reading. So between the reading and writing, there's also that opportunity for braiding our learning. And then finally, that braiding learning with our content skills. And that goes beyond just vocabulary. If I am doing learning about research in my reading with my library media specialist, I can turn around with fourth grade and do research on the different explorers and addressing my social studies content and how I can read about those and then do some writing with them too. So making sure that we have those opportunities to braid all of that together. So with unfinished learning, there's two ways to address some of that. There's remediation, which is backing up instruction to address that instruction from previous grades, and acceleration, which is moving forward with grade level instruction, and then just addressing specific skills in that context when appropriate. Sometimes we call that just-in-time learning. So one of the things that we are seeing from a lot of our national organizations, as well as you will probably hear in other sessions over these next 3 days for Engage, is that acceleration is what is recommended in most cases. Making sure that you are moving forward with those grade level skills and pulling in just what you need just prior to those when that prerequisite skill might be asked for. However, there is a very large notable exception for this when it comes to foundational reading skills, particularly those that have to be taught in a sequential manner, which is primarily phonemic awareness and phonics skills. For those particular skills, there are 3 things that should be considered to promote success. First, you need to utilize that strong sequence of skills, which is supported by research. This could be the sequence of skills that's included in your curriculum resources, but making sure it's important for teachers to discuss those learning progress with the teacher from the previous grade, as well as to assess their students to determine where learning should begin for the whole group. So K-3 teachers, you know that you will be giving a screening assessment at the beginning of the year, whether it's STAR, Acadians, Dibbles, whatever it is that your district uses. Those screening assessments are more than just a number on a page. It lets us know, is that student where we would expect them to be? Is there something that we need to back up and address? So if I have 3rd grade students who are all really struggling with an oral reading fluency, I don't want to just assume that we need to practice more fluency. It is very likely we need to back up and address maybe some more phonics or maybe even phonemic awareness because they've missed out on a lot of that.
So we are actually, Melissa, almost to the point where
Right.
we need to be wrapping up. So, which I hate because I know we have a lot more information that we could be sharing. I didn't know if you wanted to really quickly talk about a couple things, and then maybe we can give them access to the survey and the slide that has the links.
You read my mind, because I was just thinking we don't have time for our last activity. So one of the things, like I said, we just barely hit the surface of elementary literacy. And we knew that going in. You cannot address something like this in an hour and a half. So we have been developing over the last year some early literacy modules that will be on OSDE Connect that have some very simple try immediately type activities that you can do in each of these areas. And then this is something we will continue to build. So if you are not familiar with OSDE Connect, it's very simple just to log in. We will have that login available for you in just a moment. And you can watch these very short videos and then turn around and practice it in your own classroom just to help with your own learning too. Also, Superintendent Hoffmeister in her keynote address this morning talked about Ready Together Oklahoma from the American Recovery Plan money that we have available to us. And as a result of Ready Together Oklahoma, we also are going to be able to offer Science of Reading professional development for 10,000 teachers at no cost to teachers or districts over the next 3 years. So this is eligible for all teachers who work with K through 3 students on reading, spelling, or related language skills, whether you're in the general ed classroom, special ed classroom, interventionist. If you're working with those kiddos, then that's where you can go. This is a 2-year commitment. It has some self-paced learning, as well as there will be some different learning sessions with a facilitator. And you should plan for, if you're wanting to do this, about an hour a week during the school year. Right now we have an interest survey out, and then we'll be sending out a registration link soon for that to get started. We'll be doing this in 4 phases. So we'll start phase 1 this fall, phase 2 will be in the winter, phase 3 will be next fall, and phase 4 will begin next December. So if you're not able, if this is just not a good time for you to start this fall, there will be some opportunities for you to be involved at a later time.
So super quickly, an additional professional development opportunity. You can also look into the Oklahoma Excel community. It tends to work really well with teams in districts and in schools. It's a networked improvement community. Everything is job embedded. You get continuous support from the Project Excel team. If you want more information about that, we have links here, both for information as well as to apply. The deadline for that is July 2nd. And then we do ask that you just take a quick survey for us. If you can go to this, Jason's putting it in the chat. Thank you for that. We just need to know which area you would like to learn a little bit more about. We have priority number 1 for you, and then priority number 2. So it's just 2 questions, and then you're done. Very easy. And finally, our contact information. If you need to get a hold of any of us, our emails are available, as well as our phone numbers in the office. Email is probably best. We are still telecommuting several days a week. Email goes where we go. And then if you want to collaborate with us on social media, or if you want to sign up for the ELA newsletters, they are also on this slide. The link to today's session is in the bottom right corner, but I believe Jason is sharing that out as well, in addition to the professional development certificate of attendance today. And I just want to thank everyone who came and participated. The Jamboards were a huge hit. I love that. And I will be sharing out information with that and making sure that we kind of have a little bit more collaboration going on after the fact. So thank you all so, so much.
Thank you all.
Someone was asking for that OSDE Connect link, and I'm quickly trying to pull that up. I did not see that on the landing page.
Those modules are not launched yet. So that would be something, I mean, we can give the link, but those are not modules that are ready for participation quite yet.
Those modules will be ready this fall.
But if teachers wanted to maybe get set up with an account, I will put that link in the chat right now
Absolutely.
so they can
Absolutely.
be ready.
Thank you.
There we go. All right. Well, thank you all. The link for the certificate for today's session. Let's
I think
see.
Jason put that in the chat, I believe.
I did.
Yeah, I'm
It's
gonna
the
put
one
it-
that says certificate of attendance.
There we go. All right. We'll stick around in case there's any last minute issues with accessing certificates, things like that. And otherwise, hope you guys come back at 1 o'clock for some other of the sessions that we have going on. And yes, Candy, we are so very excited about that Science of Reading training that will be happening. So we will be getting more information out just as quickly as we can. All right. Thank you all. And I think we're going to go ahead and shut this down. You ready, Deb?
Sure.
All right.